Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Don't miss out on the final football game of the season with Prize Picks. Join now because Prize Picks are giving away a free pick for the big game where 1 yard equals 1 win. Just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the Prize Picks app and use code FIELD and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FIELD on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Komm du noch?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Pointless Exercise podcast. The playoffs are starting. You might not know that in Chicago, but they are. And so with me to talk about the end of the season and the beginning of the postseason is Bally senior MLB writer David Brown. David, how are you?
Well, Andy, I should have mentioned, I thought maybe we had talked about it already. I'm now former senior Bally MLB writer. There's a whole great story that I can't really talk about, but they basically eliminated the editorial department in late August, and then in late September, they eliminated me. So I'm a free agent. So if anybody out there listening happens to be running a baseball journalism website, I'm open for business.
Well, that's too bad. I hate to hear that. I'm sure a man of your immense talent will be scooped up by someone.
Oh yeah, well, it's inevitable, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the ridiculous, terrible irony of this business is that people want to consume what you have, and yet you are at the mercy of finding someone who will give you the platform.
But enough about this depressing subtopic. Let's talk about
let's lighten the mood. Let's talk about the Cubs. On September 6th, the Cubs swept the Giants. They were 1.5 games behind the Brewers in the NL Central, and they were 1.5 games behind the Phillies for the number 1 wild card spot. That was about the time that Jim Deshaies made his bold proclamation that he thought by the time the Cubs went to Milwaukee, they'd be ahead of the Brewers. The Cubs then commenced to go 7-15, and by the time they got to Milwaukee, they were all but eliminated from the playoffs.
7-15. It didn't seem that good at the time.
It
seemed worse.
I think it's because there were
lost every day.
So many of the 15 losses were like by a run or two.
Yeah.
They were good at, like, they beat the Pirates 14-1. Then they lost. They played the Pirates 2 more times and lost both.
Skewing that run differential.
Yep. They swept the Rockies, and then they won one more time after that. So it's not like we haven't seen it before. Cub fans have lived through. Actually, I feel like this is a good learning experience for Cub fans who may have hopped on, say in 2015.
Right.
Because this is more the reality than 2015, 16, and 17 were. Like, we go to the playoffs every year, and we at least win a round. Sometimes we win the World Series. This is great. No, this is what it's like. Getting to the last 2 weeks and just knowing that there's another shoe that's about to drop.
Right.
And Seiya is probably going to be the one who drops it.
Oh.
Well, I feel really bad for him because he literally, I just looked at the numbers. The last 2 months of the season, he was their best hitter. He had a better last 2 months even than Cody Bellinger, who had a good last 2 months. And there will be nincompoops out there who all they remember about Seiya this year is that he dropped that fly ball.
I didn't have the heart to look. Did he say that it was the lights?
Well, it kind of got lost in translation, literally. Basically what we got out of it was, I took it that way because he thought he caught it. Like, he was right under the ball. Outfielders, baseball players in general, things happen to distract them all the time, but you just know when you're about to catch a ball.
Yeah.
And he was under it, and he saw it long enough that he was sure he caught it. And he didn't. And it sure sounds like, as it was coming down, he lost it, but felt like he had tracked it well enough that he was going to catch it anyway. And he didn't. And that immediately draws all the Brant Brown comparisons and all that stuff. There's obviously lots of differences. Watching the game in real time, I thought Seiya was going to catch it. I thought they were going to go to the ninth inning, up a run, and they were going to lose the game in the bottom of the ninth because Julian Mayweather, is that his name? I can't remember. I've forgotten all their names. Merriweather Lewis, and Frank Clark
got lost on the way.
The way they were, I can't imagine they were actually going to close that game out. The other thing was the Brant Brown one was literally, you catch it, they win. He drops it, they lose. It's literally the last play of the game. And the Cubs, Seiya actually batted in the ninth. Had a chance to atone for his own. And then the other thing that's not a parallel is that in the next game, Seiya did not get attacked by a bird. I don't know if you remember that. But after the horrific loss in Milwaukee, the Cubs got on a plane and they flew to Houston in the Astrodome. And in the first inning of the game, Jim Riggleman had put Brant right back out there in left field. There was some big black bird that was literally attacking him in the outfield.
I don't remember that.
Yes, I'll never forget it because it's like, holy shit. Is this a bad sign?
Right.
Is this good luck that there's an enormous crow that is pecking at our left fielder?
Inside of, was that a dome stadium at that point? Was that the Astrodome?
It was the Astrodome, yeah.
It was the Astrodome,
yeah.
Right.
So how did it get in? Did it buy a ticket? But yeah, there's a lot of blame to go around. One pocket blamed the fact that David Ross basically kind of Leo DeRochered most of his lineup. Everybody played every day, and by the end of the season, they'd started to run out of gas. There's no argument that he didn't wear the bullpen out. I mean, literally, they were hurt even. It was a combination of guys who had been pitched too much and guys who had been pitched so much that they were on the injured list. And then, I know fans don't really want to hear this, it wasn't that good of a team. I mean, it was a team that really needed the season to end while they were still in the playoffs. It was one of those, like, God, we got to run the clock out, and maybe we can make the playoffs.
No better evidence of this than the Marlins are in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, give our buddy Skip Schumacher credit, but it's they're hurt and they're not very good,
right.
And here they are. That's what the Cubs were playing for. It's not any great prize.
One fortunate bit of happenstance. Does happenstance have to be positive? I think it does. For the Marlins was that they literally got the Braves for a 3-game series the day after the Braves clinched the East.
Right.
And the only 3 games in the stretch run that the Braves basically said, fuck it, were the 3 against the Marlins. Because then they were like, all right, we get a week off between the playoffs and the regular season and playoffs. Last year we took too much time off, and Snicker just played everybody. The break the Cubs caught was that their 3 best pitchers were Strider just wasn't in line to pitch, and then Fried and Morton are on the injured list. They didn't get any of that one, but they still had to pitch to all of the 27 Yankees that the Braves have now, and we just couldn't get them out. I did think it was a nice moment in the game in the next night after the Seiya thing. Cubs are clinging to a lead. Maybe it was even tied by then. I think they had just tied it. The Braves had just tied it, and Ronald Acuna stole his 70th base in like the 9th inning of the game. He's like the go-ahead, the winning run, and he stops and he pulls the base out of the ground and he holds it above his head, and then they play a video montage of all 70 of his stolen bases, I think, and then the players run out and they hug him, and I think they had a champagne shower. It was like they were there for like an hour and a half while the Cubs just stood on the field, and Jim DeShays got madder and madder and madder, and then finally the game started and the Cubs lost in 10. But
well, one thing I noticed about that situation, at least at first, was Ozzie Albies was ready to hit because it was a tie game, and there was a winning run or go-ahead run at second base, and he had a kind of an exasperated look on his face. So it isn't, sour grapes or whatever that some people wanted to say about the Cubs complaining, or the broadcast anyway.
I actually thought that what I was hoping at home was that it was going to give the Cubs manager enough time to realize he should probably walk Ozzie Albies. And just on the off, because there's only one out. And it's like, I got news for you. Mark Leiter Jr., whoever the hell was still in there.
Right.
Maybe it was Julian Merriweather. I forget. They all blur together. He's not going to get two guys out without allowing this run in. You might get lucky, and one of them hits a really hard ground ball at Dansby or Nico. So you should probably set that double play up. And of course, he didn't do it. So, because why? The Braves, they could beat you by 3, I guess, if they hit a home run. But otherwise, I don't think Ozzie's run means a whole hell of a lot.
Right.
But we got a lot of that down the stretch. A lot of pitchers being pulled too late when it was obvious that it was too late. Pitchers being left in when you're like, oh, this isn't going to work. And then it didn't. And a lot of bunting, a lot of weird bunting all of a sudden. It's always a good thing when you have a lead against the Braves to just play for one run then afterwards.
Right.
Like you're going to shut them down for the rest of the game. So just, let's bunt a guy over. It's like you're going to have to put crooked numbers up or you're going to blow this lead. It's also bad when people are like, that Seiya game was a game where they had originally had a 6-0 lead, and they blew it. And people are like, remember that 6-run lead the Cubs blew? And you're like, which one? Because there ended up being 3 of them in this season. There were 2 down the stretch, and there was one on the 3rd of July against Milwaukee, where with the bases loaded, clinging to what was left of their 6-run lead, David Ross went out and summoned Anthony Kay from the bullpen to get the biggest out of the season to that point. Shockingly, he allowed a run, bases clearing triple instead. And then Cub fans will let you know that game, the weird game that is never going to be, it got finished in absentia. Between the Marlins and the Mets, where the Mets had a 1-0 lead, I think, going into the 9th. And Buck didn't have much bullpen left because of the doubleheader the day before and some other stuff. And when they finally, first batter got on, and then a couple of lefties were coming up. And who came out of the bullpen to save the day for the Mets and the Cubs but Anthony Kay? And he didn't. He gave up 3 runs. That was an interesting thing. So they, in the rule book, because it was in the good old days, this used to happen. This was like a regular thing where rain would come in the last inning, or after it had been an official game, and the visiting team would like take the lead, and then the rain would come and he couldn't resume it, and then the visiting team would lose because the home team hadn't had their chance to bat, so it would revert back to the inning before. And they basically had gotten rid of that, with the one exception, because they just make it a suspended game and you just pick it up either the next day or the next time you face each other. Well, if it's the last time 2 teams meet in the season and there's no shared off day, then it goes back to that. So that's what happened. And by the letter of the law, the Marlins should have just lost. But baseball's like, well, there's that Monday. So you guys could just fly back and play an inning and a third get you 4 outs to finish this game. But then they didn't need it. So instead of the Marlins having to go back to finish it out as a win, the Mets just get the win. It's all very complicated.
This is why Marvin Barnes never wanted to get on a time machine.
So what I wanted to ask you was, I want to talk tiebreaker with you here before we get to the playoffs, because this was a huge issue on the marquee broadcast the last week of the season. It was a huge issue because here are the Cubs with this fabulous run differential. 3rd best in the National League, like 6th best in all of baseball.
Yeah.
It ended up being 105 runs they outscored their opponents by. But they didn't own the tiebreaker if they tied with the Brewers, the Diamondbacks, the Braves, the Reds, the Marlins, or the Phillies. Because they had lost the season series to all of them.
Right.
And, in fact, I have handy looking at it right here. They were 25-40 against those teams. That's not good. But they had this big run differential. So Boog and JD were like, I think it would be a lot more fair if the tiebreaker was the run differential. Talk about
we could just
cherry picking
pretend
a
like
stat.
we didn't play these teams. Yeah.
So I looked at it, and if you went say you went run differential against the teams, because that's really what you would do. You wouldn't go with the total. But what Boog was advocating for was, it's just the total run differential. So you get to the end of the season, these teams are tied. Who scored more runs than their opponents over the course of the season? Because in the Premier League and soccer, the first tiebreaker is goal differential.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that it's that way in the English Premier League is there are ties. So it is to disincentivize a team from trying to just hold on to their place on the table by playing scoreless draws at the end of a year. Basically just kick the ball around for 90 minutes, entertaining no one, to try to just keep your record intact. So basically what they wanted to do was incentivize scoring. Because if you end up tied, you better have more goals scored than the other teams, or you have bigger goal differential. Last I checked, baseball doesn't have that issue.
They probably should have ties, but they don't.
No. Well, that's what the Manfred Man is for. That alleviated all that.
That's great.
So if you went by that, the Cubs with their run differential. Here's why Boog, I think, maybe would advocate for the season. They would have gotten the tiebreaker against the Marlins because over the course of the 6 games, they outscored them by a run. They wouldn't have got it against the Phillies. They would have got it against the Reds, and they would not have. They would not have gotten it against the Diamondbacks. They were -10. So anyway, the question I want to ask you though is, I don't like the non-competitive. I mean, I know it's competitive, right? It's supposedly it's valuing the season,
right?
But the thing that baseball has been chasing for a long time now is they love the game 163s. They love the inherent drama of one game, winner takes all, get in the playoffs or don't. And they created this ridiculous wild card round, the best 2 out of 3 with all 3 games played in one town to cut down, to speed it up so the TV wouldn't get mad at them for cutting into football time.
Right.
trying to like fake it. But I think they should still play off tiebreaker games or tie breaks, because there really wouldn't be that many, right? Like, so if two teams tie for the Central, but the one of them will be the division winner, the other will be a wild card. You don't play that off, right?
Right.
Because you're not playing for a playoff spot, you're playing for seeding. So you're not going to do that. Then you go to one of your little tiebreakers. The thing I think they're afraid of is, what if like 4 teams tie for the last wild card spot and it gets super common? Now you can't drag that out. So how about this first? Why don't you use your fancy little tiebreakers to whittle it down to 2 teams, and they play, and see somebody, you're still playing to get in, and then you get your magical extra game that everybody loves to watch.
That's a great idea. I wasn't expecting you to say that. I think that's a marvelous idea. It's the best of both worlds.
I think so too. So the math geeks can figure out the tiebreakers, but the people who actually like to see it settled on the field can see it settled on the field.
The tiebreakers give us a game 163. It's really good. I mean, one thing, there's a couple, with the added rounds or teams and playoffs, they probably think, well, it's harder to, we need to eliminate those tiebreaker games because we have extra playoff games built in to the system, and we're going into November already. So they've kind of, Major League Baseball has sort of talked themselves out of something like that before it even begins. But to do it your way, adding 1 game rather than worrying about adding 2 games or 3 games.
You'd settle it all on the Monday.
Right.
You wouldn't have to worry, but you could still start on Tuesday.
Right.
And it might make for some onerous travel for somebody, but that's just part of it. You should have won your spot. You had to play in for it, and now you have to waste maybe your best pitcher, and now you got to hump it from New York to LA and play a game the next day. Well, tough. That's just part of it.
That's really great, and I think I bet it's something that they'll do. I bet we'll see that someday. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, well, I'll send it over to Rob. I'll fax it over on the same paper that I drew up the Manfred Man for him. Actually, I don't want to take credit for the rule. I want to take credit for the name, because I still don't like the rule.
No.
I think it's stupid.
Right.
But I like
the
clever name.
This is a positive thing. Yeah, that would totally be great.
Okay, good. So score 1 for me. One good idea.
I would say score 2. It's that good. Score 2 for you.
All right, 2. I like it. I'll take the extra one. Here's another thing I unearthed while I was looking at Cub run differential. So they 105. They outscored their opponents by 105 runs. If you take out the number of runs that they're basically, I need to explain it this way. Their run differential against the Oakland A's, who they only played 3 times, was plus 23.
Right.
Their run differential against the Pittsburgh Pirates, who the only reason they finished above 500 is they just kicked the Pirates' ass over and over and over again, was plus 52.
Mm-hmm.
Their run differential against the dead-ass last St. Louis Cardinals was plus 20. If you take those 3 out, the Cubs' run differential against everybody else in Major League Baseball, minus 9.
Right.
So they had a losing record against every team that finished ahead of them in the National League, and one team that finished behind them, the Padres. And they got outscored by everybody except the A's, the Pirates, and the Cardinals. So,
when you put it that way, it seems pretty fair that they didn't get in.
Yeah, it actually does. Which is why David Rush should have got Manager of the Year. He probably should still get Manager of the Year votes for the wonderful job he did. Actually, let's not do that. Although Tom Ricketts did say yesterday he did a great job.
Corey. Yeah, the one thing, if there's one hair of unfairness about the whole thing, it's how MLB, you've got to play everybody, so you don't necessarily play these teams a lot.
Yeah.
In past years, maybe the Cubs, if they had played twice as many games against all these teams that they lost, maybe they would have had a better record. Maybe they would have had some tiebreakers. That's the only thing. You're not playing 12 games, 15 games against these teams. So, it's a little less fair at that point. You lose 2 out of 3 series and you've lost your tiebreaker. So, from that standpoint, I guess I have a little bit of sympathy, but not a whole lot.
Well, honestly, given how bad the Central was this year, the Cubs and the Reds both, I'm sure, really missed the extra games against this year. That you would have wanted more games against the Cardinals and more game against the Pirates. Instead, you were playing the other 2 divisions more, which had better teams in it than yours did. So they actually got penalized by the more balanced schedule. But that's enough of that.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place. For changes big and small. Loud or quiet. Find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Hey, Atlanta. Apple is open for small business. That's right. We're here to make starting and running your business simpler. With privacy and security built in on all devices, it's easy for you to protect your customers' data. And if you need hardware or software support, you'll get advice from business experts at no cost whatsoever. So you can focus more on the soup du jour and less on, the other stuff. At Apple, we're open for your small business. Go to apple.com/small business or visit an Apple store to learn more.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the vehicle owner's manual for important feature limitations and information.
So there are 12 teams who actually did make the playoffs. And 8 of them are going to play tomorrow. So in the American League, we have the Rays and the Rangers, the Twins and the Blue Jays, and then those are the 2 early games. And then the evening ones are Brewers and Diamondbacks, Phillies and Marlins. We can talk about each of them, but is there, just at first blush, are any of those higher seeds on upset alert?
Oh, absolutely, especially in a short series. I have a good feeling about the Twins getting through, even though they won't have Byron Buxton and they're missing some guys. Toronto, though, they're starting pitching. They have one of the best groups of starting pitchers. So if they can continue that, they're going to be in all their games. I don't think their bullpen is particularly deep, but that alone. The Twins have such a horrible postseason history. I know that's not necessarily, the fault of the guys on this team. The Twins should definitely be on upset alert. The Rays, there's been just so much attrition. It's amazing how, you'd think in past years when you look at, players that the Twins had lost and the Rangers and the Rays, you'd think that would have ruined their seasons, but they managed to make it to the playoffs anyway. But, I think more so in the American League, we could have higher seeds win. I don't think Arizona is going to beat the Brewers, but they did win the regular season series against them. The Phillies, as imperfect as they are, should win easily against the Marlins, but the Marlins don't have Sandy Alcantara and they don't have Yuri Perez, but they're here anyway. So I think there's a decent, probably the best chance of any high seed winning is the Blue Jays against the Twins. But I think all the lower seed, the better seeds, I should say, are going to win in the first round.
I would like to see the Twins win at least a game. Haven't they lost 18 in a row in the playoffs?
Yeah. I see them coming through. I think they're, this doesn't seem to matter anymore, but earlier in the season, they won the season series against the Yankees. It was really early in the season. And I just thought it was an indication that they were mindful of, the history of the organization. And so I think these are guys that are going to be ready to have their best games, for whatever that's worth. And they're not going to be overlooking anything or be happy to be there. I think the Twins, it's a dangerous opponent with the Blue Jays, but I think that the Twins will get through and win for the first time in forever in the postseason.
Yeah, I like that. The Rangers had an odd finish to the season where it looked like they were going to blow it.
Right.
And then they kind of did a 2005 White Sox where
yes,
you're comfortably ahead most of the season, everybody's printing playoff tickets, and then holy shit, are we going to blow this? And then they get hot at the end of the season and you roll into the playoffs. And then they're playing a really good Rays team that doesn't have a middle infield. So
right,
you can see them getting through. I feel like, actually, I don't know that I think the Diamondbacks can beat the Brewers. I think if I was the Brewers, I would have been really disappointed at yesterday's results because I would have wanted the Marlins, not the Diamondbacks.
Yeah.
And
I think there's a big difference too. Yes.
So it turned out with the Astros beating the Diamondbacks, it actually put the Diamondbacks. If I were the Diamondbacks, I would rather face the Brewers than the Phillies. So they probably were cool with getting beat 6-0 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I think it was one of those athletic podcasts. I think it was one with Eno Saris, where they were talking about if you take the rosters and then scrunch them down playoff wise, where you kind of eliminate the back of the bullpen and you don't really worry so much about the bench, then you rank them. The Phillies take a pretty big jump.
Yeah,
like they're a team far better suited, and we saw it last year. They're far better suited to the playoffs than they are to 162 games. The biggest issue they have is that if you hit a fly ball to right or left field, you can just keep running. Thanks to former Cubs Nick Castellanos and Kyle Schwarber, who both have to play there. It was funny, Eno said, well, maybe they could just DH one of those two. It's like, well, you got Bryce Harper. And pretty sure he probably needs to be in the lineup every day because he might be the best clutch player in like 20 years. So, but I remember back in the heady days when it looked like the Cubs were going to get in, I was trying to figure out if there was a way that they could get through the playoffs while avoiding the Phillies and the Braves, who I thought were the two biggest threats in the National League.
Yeah.
And you couldn't. I don't remember why you couldn't, but I remember just based on seeding, basically, you were going to get one or the other at least, and maybe both, which would be bad.
If if you're asking, like, overall, at least in the first couple rounds, who's a dangerous, kind of a higher, worse seed, Philly for sure. And I think, you look at their matchup against the Marlins. The Phillies overall, even though they're, two of their better hitters are Schwarber and Harper, they were better overall, top 1 through 9 against left-handed pitching, and those guys aren't even that Schwarber's not very good against lefties, but he's okay. He's not inert, and Harper's actually about the same. So, and they're going to face two left-hand starters for the Marlins. I was kind of looking for any reason to pick the Marlins without Perez and Alcantara, but Jesus Luzardo and Braxton Garrett are decent left-handed pitchers, but the Phillies even kind of have an advantage there. So with the Braves, with their pitching staff, the top of the pitching staff, kind of with Fried and Charlie Morton questionable. I know they looked invincible, but I think they're vulnerable again. So I don't know if the Phillies are going to run through the first 2 rounds, but I think there's a good chance we're going to see them again in the NLCS.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Fried will be back for the DS. Morton wouldn't be back until the LCS.
Okay.
Which means you're probably going to have Bryce Elder making a NLDS start, which I don't think the Braves want to do, but they're just going to have to do it.
Well, yeah, I don't think they do either.
I mean, it's not quite as bad as the 98 Cubs having to start Mark Clark in the first game of their playoff series against the Braves.
Right. But that's why they were trying to get other people ready for that spot all season. Injured guys who didn't end up making it because they don't really trust Elder. So maybe Elder will surprise us again, and maybe the Braves can, even if he doesn't do well, they can play around it. So
how hard did they try, though? I mean, I'm sure at the deadline they probably could have called the Cubs and got Jamison Tyon.
Right. But they had even people in their organization. I think they were hoping that like Kyle Wright or somebody like that would be ready to take over. So,
yeah, it's a weird year in the National League in that there were two teams were clearly better than everybody else, the Dodgers and the Braves, and both have very uncertain pitching heading into the playoffs.
Right. No, I mean the Dodgers starting pitching it's
a mess.
Well, Urias not available. Very shaky after the first 2 starters. Yep. So, I would not put a lot of money on the Dodgers to get past their first playoff series, be it the Brewers or the Diamondbacks.
Well, and I think especially if if the Diamondbacks beat the Brewers, wait, they don't, do they? They don't reseed, do they, from round to the next?
No, they don't reseed.
No, they should. Because if they did, and the Diamondbacks got past the Brewers, then the Phillies, actually either team, the Phillies or the Marlins, would have gone to L.A.
Yeah.
Although I guess if your whole goal is to win the World Series, I don't know why I keep thinking about the Phillies. Maybe it's because they have so many equal Cubs on it. You probably want to play the Braves in the DS because you only want to have to beat them 3 times. You don't want to have to beat them 4 times.
Right.
The better the team, the fewer the times you want to have to beat them to upset them.
Right.
Which is inherently what makes the wild card round a coin flip for anybody. You lose that first game, and then anybody can win. Anybody can beat you 1 out of 2, and you're screwed. I mean, I remember the last time the Cubs ventured into the playoffs, as pretend playoffs as they were in the COVID year. They played a Marlins team that wasn't any damn good, but had 2 good starting pitchers. The Cubs couldn't hit either one of them, and they immediately went home. So, stuff happens. So then if we look at the better... we already talked about the Braves and Dodgers a little bit. But over in the American League, you have the defending world champion Astros, who a couple of days ago looked like they were uncertain to make the playoffs and ended up with the 2nd seed and a week off.
Yeah, with 2 games to go, they were, they could have, they could have missed the playoffs if the Mariners could have jumped over them. So
they got swept by your Kansas City Royals. And like the second or third to last series of the season.
The Royals were better than mediocre down the stretch. It was kind of surprising to see them actually execute to that point. Usually, you're with the Royals, you were looking for moral victories and other things like that, but they were a pain in the butt.
Yeah. Well, it helped when Nelson Velasquez hits a homer every day.
Yeah.
Another guy the Cubs just couldn't find a spot for. He's got too many bats. Can't play this guy. There. We'll take Jose Cuas. That'll be an even deal.
Cuas was in session. Yeah. I don't know how long term of a fit Nelson's going to be, if he's going to be that hot or whatever, but the Cubs probably could have used some of that. Yes.
Well, we knew from earlier in the year that David Ross wouldn't play him, so it didn't matter. Nelson got off to a really hot start with the Cubs. Actually, he had, I don't know where he ended up, but at one point he had a .632 slugging for the Royals, which is really high. And if you looked at his Cub numbers, he had a .631 slugging for the Cubs. So it's not like he hadn't produced when he played, but he still spent a lot of time chained to the bench. So that's all right. We got Jose Cuas, and he actually was useful, and he was so useful that he pitched basically every day. This poor arm, I'm sure.
Until he had no use.
And he only walked 14 guys in 28 appearances. I guess for him, that's pretty good.
Well, we've talked about before the setup where we don't have any tiebreaker games, so they've taken some excitement out of it from that standpoint. Another thing, if you look up and down these rosters, we complain about the Cubs and the decisions that either Ross made or Jed made to not add more relief pitching help, and the Cubs didn't really have anybody left down the stretch. They're not the only team that was like that. Most teams refused to add very much. There were a couple of big moves, there were a couple of smaller moves, but you can tell that these teams were not all that excited to sacrifice anything for one of these playoff spots. So, as exciting as the news is for baseball about the attendance being up and the games being shorter and people being happy with that, how the playoffs were set up. I mean, I don't know. I didn't feel a lot of excitement about how the season was going to end. I was just kind of bracing for it to end. There wasn't wasn't a whole lot of great stories to get teams to the playoffs, and there's no tiebreakers to look forward to, and there was no impetus on the part of the teams to make the pennant race any more exciting with trades. It was, there were a lot of trades, but it felt like there could have been twice as many trades. The Cubs certainly could have helped themselves and maybe would have made the playoffs, had they added a couple more relief pitchers. But it just doesn't look like that's something they're interested in doing. So, I don't know what kind of product we have here. In the long term, I think there's still lots of stuff they need to do to make it more interesting.
Yeah, product is a good word. It's a product of when you increase the number of playoff teams, then you lower the bar to get into the playoffs, which basically tells teams, we don't have to build a 90-win team to make the playoffs. Right. We can build. The Cubs won 83 games and they almost made it. And they're probably looking at okay, we need to build an 85-win team to get in next year. And then at the trade deadline, you're trying to figure out how do we get to 85 wins. And so you're going to end up with that. And you're not going to want them to part with one of your precious prospects. You're like, well, we don't need that much to get in. So we'll just settle for this and we'll see what happens. It was, and a big reason why the players didn't want to expand the postseason was that very reason, thinking that when free agency comes around, teams are like, well, yeah, he'd be nice to have, but we don't really need him to make the playoffs. Or we don't need, and so instead of 4 teams bidding on a guy, you got 1 or 2, which keeps his potential salary down because they're like, we'll be good enough to be in the, the Cubs. It was very telling to have Tom talking to reporters yesterday. He talked about, we don't play for consolation prize or whatever, so we're not happy that we didn't make the playoffs. But they were perfectly content with the fact that they were just in it at the end.
Right.
And even to the point where I was just thinking of the Marlins. The Marlins tried to add a lot. They made a lot of moves. A lot of them were little fringy moves. They got Josh Bell, who ended up being really good for them. But they ended up with an extra pitcher that I honestly forgot they had him until the other day when all of a sudden Matt Moore comes out of their bullpen. He didn't get traded at the deadline. He was one of the guys that threw him on waivers. The Guardians got him. The Guardians fell out, and then they waived him. And the Marlins got him. He got waived. He's a really good lefty reliever who 2 teams were like, hey, you want to go pitch for a playoff team? Because it ain't going to be us. And they, the Guardians didn't. Well, I guess the Guardians saved a little money. Like, hey, we can save a week of his salary. So we'll just let him go. The Dolans. But honestly, I think they did it more like, here, we're not making it. See if you get claimed by a team that's going to the playoffs.
They put Lucas Giolito back on waivers too. They were
just nobody wanted
ready to lose him.
But yeah, the Cubs, who had a glaring weakness in their bullpen. I mean, Jed even said it. He's like, no, there were guys available. We didn't want to pay what people were selling. And it could very well be that it ended up being the right decision because it might not have been anybody that was worth a damn that was out there. But also, you're like, well,
that's true. That's true from an analytical standpoint. It's true, but it's also not very competitive of you. It's not. You're not. No. You should still try.
Yes.
There should be enough incentive to try. And you look at how the Yankees spend a certain amount, but they don't go that high. The Red Sox certainly are like that. They're not necessarily trying to win the World Series.
No.
And, the Cubs aren't necessarily really trying to make the playoffs. They just sort of hope they do. And that's it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth if you're, maybe for casual fans it doesn't matter. But for somebody who pays too much attention to baseball, it's just kind of an ugly time right now.
Yeah. I mean, there's this idea, I think mostly pushed by front offices and owners, and some fans just decide it's true, that the whole thing is just to get in the playoffs, because then anything can happen. The best team doesn't always win the World Series. Well, that's true, the best team doesn't always, but you know what? They win most of the time.
Right.
So if your goal is really to win one, it shouldn't be to try to get be the last seed for 5 years in a row, and hopefully you get one. It should be, if you're one of the top 2 seeds for 3 or 4 years in a row, you might very well win the World Series. Because the reason they win is because they have the best team. And yeah, upsets happen, but upsets don't happen all the time.
Right. And even we haven't talked about the Orioles. We talked a little bit about the Astros.
That's the one team we haven't mentioned yet are the Orioles.
The Orioles were in a better spot before Felix Bautista got hurt. Did I say Felix Bautista? No. Is that who it was? Or was that the Cubs pitcher?
That was Jose Bautista.
Their closer who throws 105 miles an hour. And, they were, if they still had him, I have to think that not having him may be the best pitcher for an inning in the league, an inning at a time. Not having that available in the playoffs eventually is going to catch up to them. But, other than that, they are still, they probably had the least amount of attrition outside of that. But even that, the Orioles were in a position to trade one of their many, many prospects. I mean, they have a ridiculous amount of prospects. And they should have traded for somebody better than Jack Flaherty for the starting rotation. And they could have traded for more depth in the bullpen. And they would be they would be in an amazing position to possibly win the whole thing. And now, I mean, they really have risked. The Astros could get him, the Twins could get him, maybe the Rays or the Rangers could get him. They just all in the name of not giving up anything for the future. And it's another way. It's different than the Cubs not adding for a relief pitcher, and it's a little different than the Yankees or Red Sox not spending enough. But it's they've put themselves in kind of a precarious situation. I mean, it's been a great story. They deserve this and all that, but
no, I would argue that it's worse for the Orioles to do what they did, because if you're the Cubs or the Yankees this year, although I guess we're arguing about different things. The Yankees, it's like, okay, why are you content with, you spend a lot of money, but you don't spend Actually, they waste a lot of money. They waste a lot of money, but they have imposed an artificial limit on themselves where they didn't used to have it. It used to be, okay, fine, that contract didn't work out, screw it, I don't care, we'll get a replacement for this guy. Now it's like, well, we got to wait until this contract comes off our books, so we can't do this. But at the deadline, I can forget. I don't want it, but I can forgive the Cubs more than I could the Orioles for what they did at the deadline. Yeah. The Cubs were a team that with like 3 days to go before the deadline weren't sure if they were going to buy or sell. The Orioles are sitting there with one of the best teams in baseball, where an incremental improvement could be the difference between winning the World Series and not winning it, where the Cubs' incremental improvement might be what ended up happening, barely missing the last wildcard spot or getting the last wildcard spot. I mean, the Orioles, you supposedly spent all this time losing all these games to amass all this talent so you could go out and try to win the World Series. Your plan miraculously comes to fruition, and you're like, well, no, we don't want to sell any of these guys yet. Because why? You've got yourself. You're in the position you're trying to get in.
Right.
You know, it's like, well, but we could be even better next year. It's like your World Series window just opened, and it's going to close a lot faster than you think, even if you hang on to all these guys. So you might as well try to win it. I mean, I know they have they seem to have this never-ending supply of freak, blonde, curly-haired athletes that they just call one up with some weird
Dutch
name.
Descent.
Yes.
Yes.
And they all can play. But at some point, you'd be shocked to know that A, you can't play them all because you only have 9 spots, and B, it doesn't extend your window.
Matt Holliday can have only so many kids.
That's right. Now, the one bullpen guy they did acquire was, and they did it early, was the great Shintaro Fujinami.
That was
with his 7 ERA with the A's, but he was much better for the Orioles. Had a 4 ERA.
He got some big outs for him down the stretch.
And actually, just looking, his batting average against with the Orioles went down to 197. So clearly he was 4.85 ERA. Of course, reliever ERAs are mostly pointless.
Yeah, very misleading. But the John Angelos has just recently come out and said, well, and if we're going to keep all these guys like Rutschman and so forth, it's going to come out of the pockets of the fans. He actually came out and said that, they're going to have to pay to keep these guys around. Yeah. So even,
well, he basically said that there's no way they can keep them all.
Right.
Here, there, most of these guys have 5 or 6 years of control left, and their managing partner, whatever his phony title is, Daddy bought the team, is already bracing the fans for the fact that, well, some of these guys are just going to leave. It's like, maybe worry about that in like 4 years. How about you actually enjoy this? Or, how about this? You can look at what the Braves did. You can start signing these guys early, and it'll cost you a lot less. But, I don't have.
So,
I don't
therefore, at least, I mean, if we're going to worry about not being able to extend these contracts, then go for it a little more here 1 year in first place. Yeah. It was just incredible malpractice by the front office. And I assume most of the blame goes to ownership, but I don't know.
I mean, and you would think
talked them out of it.
You would think the Reds would have also be kicking themselves today because they did nothing to they had this. All of a sudden, their lineup was this dynamic, young, really scored a lot of runs, and their pitching was either hurt or bad. Right. And at the deadline, they knew that, and they could have easily added some arms, and they just didn't do it. And then when they got to play waiver roulette, they didn't get any of the pitchers. They ended up with Hunter Renfroe and Harrison Bader. Renfroe, who they DFA'd, and Bader, who got hurt. But it was like the last thing they needed was 2 more outfielders.
Right, more outfielders. I mean, it helped them against left-handed pitching or whatever, but and I guess MLB has the very strange, maybe we talked about this too, the waiver rules where it's not like fantasy baseball where you get a guy and then you have to wait on the next guy. You can claim, 15 guys if you want to make the roster space, and you get them all in a lump. Maybe they should change that, but I don't know.
Well, I definitely think they should, because This came about from a team from the Angels decide we're going to go for it, and then having it collapse so suddenly that they're like, ooh, if we can offload these guys, we can get under the competitive balance tax. This is not the last time this is going to happen.
Right.
So you're going to end up with an artificially flooded waiver thing again. And they had to push them all out at once because they were trying to hit a deadline. There basically was a deadline where they needed them off the payroll by a certain point, or they were going to, they weren't going to save enough. So they threw them all out at once.
And I don't know how much money this is going to save them either. I don't know.
Well, I just know the calculation was if every one of those guys had gotten claimed, they would then have ended up under the CBT threshold. That was why they
organization.
That was why they waived who they waived on the day they waived them, because it was their last chance, and then they didn't all get claimed. I forget who didn't, and so they ended up not being able to get under, which serves them right. They didn't get under it because
Grichuk didn't get claimed.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Randall Grichuk.
And this is a team where I forget what the anniversary was for, if it was 2002 or 1982 or whatever it is. Some anniversary of celebrating a great team, and they made all the players pay their way to town for it. They invited them for a celebration, and they're like, well, you have to pay for your own airfare and hotel. Well, I mean, that's the kind of level of money Artie Moreno's trying to save, so I guess I can see where payroll tax would bother him.
So is he not selling now?
That was the last word. They decided not to sell. Yes. That they would... and speculation was at the time they were waiting for expansion fees to kick in and all the payments that the existing teams get for that.
Yeah, because I'm sure Artie is just simply selling the Angels, which are worth what, like 5 or 6 times what he paid for them. Like that won't be enough of return on investment. Artie needs like the $30 million expansion fee on top of the $2.5 billion he's going to get for selling a team in LA. So good job, Artie. Better hang on for that. He's like, hey, you going to turn down $30 million? I'm like, if I could get $2 billion, yes, I would. I would go now. I wouldn't wait for the last 30.
Yeah, if I could not have the aggravation anymore of being the idiot in charge.
So I was surprised, my late night team is the Giants.
Yeah.
They were a rough watch, mostly because they ran out of starting pitchers in like June, and they already were set up as this, every position had a platoon, and then half the platoon guys, Mitch Haniger would come off the DL and IL and immediately break a bone and go right back on it. And everything was all jacked up. But on Wednesday of last week, the word got out that they're in the last year, they're coming up on the last year of their contract, but Farhan and Gabe are coming back. Bringing back Farhan Zaidi, the president, and Gabe, the manager. And I thought, well, that makes sense, especially since you can't really change. You can't change one or the other. You'd have to change both. Because if you only fire, say, Gabe, and then you have the president, and he tries to hire a manager, the manager's going to be like, well, you only have a contract for a year. So I'm going to have a longer contract than you, and you get fired, then I'm going to get fired, because the new guy's going to bring a guy in. And I'm thinking, well, and they obviously want to be one of the teams that throws huge amounts of money at Shohei. So I'm like, well, of course. Or Cody Bellinger. It's already, everybody knows that's their fallback if they don't get Shohei. Yeah. And then on Friday, they fired Gabe. And they didn't extend. The other thing you could have done was to have extended Farhan then. And basically said, okay, we're picking one over the other, and we're going to give him 3 more years so it lines up with whoever he hires as a manager. So now they're going to hire a manager, and then they're going to go out on these free agent visits. And the guys are going to be like, all right, well, I know you're going to be getting paid for the next 4 years, but you could be out of here in like 6 months.
Yeah. Well, I've heard some of the names that they've been talking about for manager, and it's all guys like in their organization.
Well, it's going to it would almost have to be now, though.
Yeah.
Because who are you going to go out to get?
Yeah, I'm sure they probably would love to have Bob Melvin, but is he going to want to do that?
Yeah. That's exactly who I don't know if that's who they wanted. That was the immediate rumor, was that the Padres were going to fire Bob. He was going to take the blame for going 82-80. And then he's a former Giant, and he has other ties to the organization, and they would just bring him in. And it's like, all right, well, he's already lived through the penny pinching shit with the A's. He's already had the dysfunction of the Padres, and you get kind of a nice combo when you come to the Giants right now. I don't think he's going to think that's all that attractive. So basically what it sounds like to me, as a Cub fan, to me that eliminates one of the primary, like, if assuming the Cubs are serious about bringing Cody back, this is good news for them. Because I think they're a far less attractive destination for Cody than they otherwise would have been. Because there's this unforced air of uncertainty there now, where you're like, I don't want to deal with that. I mean, if there's 4 teams with wheelbarrows full of cash, and one of them's the Giants, I'll just look at the other 3. So,
right.
Yeah, and we haven't talked since Shohei had his mysterious surgery. Was it Tommy John or was it not Tommy John? Was it a full Tommy John?
Brace,
was it a partial Tommy John? All we know is that they say he will be fully ready to hit by spring training, and he'll be able to pitch in 2025. And there was immediate, I think, speculation when he got hurt and they had to shut him down, and it became clear he was going to need some kind of surgery, that this was drastically going to cut into his value. Here was a guy that was going to sign a 10-year, $500 or $600 million contract. And then Ken Rosenthal was basically like, no, he's still going to sign the 10-year, $500 or $600 million contract.
Mm-hmm.
So do you believe that it's actually costing him any cash?
I think in the end, no, I don't think it will. Maybe it'll change how the contract is structured a little bit, but in the overall scheme of things, I think teams will be, maybe he won't be a pitcher next season, but maybe it depends on how long the contract is. I mean, I suppose maybe he'd be interested in a shorter contract so he could be a free agent again in a few years. I don't know, but I don't know how much longer he can expect to be a great player on both ends, just because of the wear and tear that it causes. So that's one thing, but I also get the feeling like that's his thing. I mean, he wants to prove that he can be a great player for a number of years on both ends. I mean, he's got an opportunity to do it, so why not? I don't think he is of a mind that he's going to become a hitter only anytime soon. So, I think he can still count on getting at least most of the money. Maybe not exactly the same way that he would have otherwise, but yeah, I think Ken Rosenthal's probably right. He's usually right about these things. And he'll get most, if not all, of what he was going to get anyway.
I agree with all that. I agree with it from this standpoint. If I was a team, I would want Shohei because he's a great player.
Yeah.
And if I had to go 10 years to get him, I would get him for 10 years. But there's no way you can go into that 10-year contract thinking he's going to be a pitcher and a hitter for you for 10 years.
Right.
Even if he hadn't caught Tommy John disease. Just the physical wear and tear of it was at some point going to, I think, force a decision. But this may, in an odd way, this might delay that decision. Because he's going to have a year off from pitching. So maybe when he comes back in 25 and he pitches again, he's like, well, I might be able to do this for 3 or 4 more years before I finally give up. Yeah. Or if he pitched all the way through in 2 years, he might have been like, I just can't do it. I think it was you and I, we talked about how there were like other players, especially other pitchers, are like amazed that he can do this at all. They're like, I wake up the day after a start, and I can barely get out of bed, and I can't lift my arm above my head. There were like Angels pitchers talking about, we show up at the park, and he's taking batting practice in the cage under the thing, like he didn't even play yesterday, and he's out there and he stole like 30-some bases. And it's like, if I got on base the day after a start, I stand on the bag, or maybe try to take a nap on the bag, and he steals second. So maybe that's counter to the argument. Maybe he's an alien. So he will be able to do this the whole time because he can already do something nobody else can fathom doing. I remember I forget who it was. I used to remember who this was. But when Ron Darling was pitching at Yale, there was some guy talking about playing against them in the College World Series or the play or whatever it was. It was a pitcher, and he was like, Ron threw a shutout against us, and then the next day he played right field. And he's out there playing right field. He goes, I had pitched 3 innings in the game that he threw the shutout against us, and I'm sitting in the dugout with my elbow in a bucket of ice. And he's playing right field. And he's like, he goes, I realized right then we're not the same guy.
Right.
But even that's weird. So like by the 98 Cubs, like Terry Mulholland and Rod Beck would make fun of pitchers who ice their elbows. They'd like walk through the clubhouse. These guys and these two, if you ever go back and look at the game logs, those two pitched like every day the last month.
Yeah,
it just didn't matter. Terry would start, take 1 day off, and then throw 2 innings out of the bullpen, take a day off, and then start again. And it was like, what the hell? And they would make fun of, like, ice belongs in a drink or in like a highball glass. It does not belong strapped to your elbow. But not everybody is. That's how you learn not everybody's the same. Right. It is one thing you don't see anymore. Remember, there was a trend for a while. They'd show the dugout, and there'd be the starting pitcher after he came out of the game, and he'd have like he'd look like a mummy. They'd have like his arm all wrapped up and his shoulder. You never see that anymore. And I'm sure it's because they're still doing it, but they're in the clubhouse. They don't bother to come back to the dugout.
Yeah.
But that was like a staple. I mean, hell, I'm surprised they didn't do that to Kerry Wood like in between innings. Kerry, let's put the ice on. There's 2 outs. Don't worry about it. We'll get you a quick ice. You'll be fine. Do you have any thoughts on the who should win the National League Most Valuable Player? It was a great year at the top of the National League players.
It is really close. I think the fact that the WARs don't account much or at all for the stolen bases. I would like to see like exactly how much all the stolen bases helped the Braves. Yeah. I haven't really. Maybe someone's written that, but I would say Acuna is. If I had a vote and I don't, he would get it, and then probably Mookie, and then maybe Freddie. I don't know. It would be close in my head, but that's the order.
Yeah, I mean it's a crazy year for those 3. As people were pointing out, that the truly impressive thing about Acuna stealing 70 bases with 40 home runs is that was 40 times on base that he couldn't steal a base because he touched all of them.
Right.
Like, that's why it's so rare, because you can only get on so many times in a season, and 40 times he just slowly trotted around all the bases. So he couldn't stop at one to steal the next one. And then Freddie is the first baseman ever to be 20-20, much less, anything else. And then Mookie, I guess for me, if you're going to go with the literal, it depends on what valuable means to you, because it's why we had this argument. Well, you didn't have an argument. We agreed last year that, and Shohei's going to win it this year, even though he didn't finish the season. Shohei should win the MVP every year because he's clearly the most valuable player. He's one of the best pitchers, and this year he was the best hitter in the American League, so he should win it every year. Then you get Mookie, they're like, okay, we don't have a second baseman. Mookie, can you come play second base? And then for a while, it's like, we don't have a shortstop. Mookie, do you want to go play shortstop? And he just does. And he's amazing at it. Like, he played the first ground ball he took this year at shortstop was the first one he'd ever taken in the big leagues. It was against the Cubs. And he made a great play. And it's like, well, of course he did. He's Mookie Betts. Right. I mean, if part of the game was, okay, we're going to pause, and now you have to bowl a perfect game, Mookie would be like, well, I can do that. I've done it 9 times. I can do it again. So, yeah, I mean, I think Freddie's probably, it's a great year, but with those other 2, I think he's a distant third.
Yeah.
And then you can just flip a coin between Acuna had just a ridiculous offensive season, and then Mookie had his best offensive season ever in a career full of them, and basically just played whatever position. Dave Roberts said, "Mookie, we don't have one of these today. Go play it." Okay, why not? The Mookie Betts thing, to me, the Red Sox trading him for any reason is still one of the dumbest things that's ever happened in baseball history.
Some people have tried to, in retrospect, half defend that, well, if they had traded him for the right guys, it wouldn't be so bad. And maybe it wouldn't seem so bad.
If they had traded him for Ronald Acuna Jr., is that what they mean? Because then it wouldn't have been so bad. But it's hard to put a package together that right. Still makes it make sense.
Right.
Because the thing was, it was not like he didn't have one foot out the door. Sometimes a player gets to a point where they basically tells the front office, I'm not signing.
Right.
He wanted more money than they were offering, but it didn't sound like his demands were so ridiculous that they traded him because that was Bloom, right? That was like his first big move.
Yeah.
Was basically like the old Larry Himes. Well, we can with Greg Max. Well, we could spend this money better than on one guy, and then of course you can't, because when the one guy is a Hall of Famer, you just pay that guy.
That's not where you save money. You save money with that next tier of guys who aren't that great, and you don't spend on them, but you spend on the greatest players if you can.
And that's
you're right. Having Mookie around, he's worth a little bit of the extra juice just to put him anywhere, and the things he can do that other players can't. It's not like, I don't know, the Red Sox treated him like he was J.D. Martinez or I don't know, or even Devers, a player who's like on a lower level.
Yeah.
Is almost as good superficially in some ways, maybe with home runs and RBIs or whatever. It was a really forest for the trees kind of a mistake.
Yeah, it's funny, the parallel that I immediately think of when I think of him and Maddox, which I only make because of we could spend that money better somewhere else, is in both instances, he went to a team that didn't need him.
Right.
But was smart enough to be like, you know what we do need? We need as many great players as possible. The Braves on paper, they didn't need another pitcher. But they're like, you know how much better this will make us? Yeah.
Right.
Like, we're good, but we can get better. So why would we say no? And the Dodgers were the same thing. People are like, your offense is great. It's like, well, you know how it would be even better? If we had Mookie Betts in it.
If the Dodgers the Dodgers won 100 games, but they had so many things wrong with them this year that if they hadn't added Mookie Betts, and they had another player, let's say, who was like Max Muncy or something, they wouldn't be nearly as dangerous.
Nope.
And that's kind of what the Cubs did when they got Jose Guzman,
mm-hmm.
and some other people instead of Max.
Well, they got Candy Maldonado, though. I mean, come on. That worked out great. He caught a fly ball once, I think. You know what a catch-22 is? That's what happens when you hit 50 balls to Candy Maldonado. I've used that joke 1,000 times with 1,000 different people.
Unkind.
Yes. Well, and to bring it around to the bulk of the people who listen to this podcast, it's a fear that we all share about. Now, Cody Bellinger is a really good player. He's not nearly. I mean, he's just not on the level with Mookie and Ronald Acuna Jr. Right. He's not. But it's one of those things where if the Cubs talk themselves into the fact, they're like, you know what, we can. If we lose Cody, we can play this guy here, we can play that guy there, we can do whatever. On a slightly lower level, they're making the same decision because you win. The Cubs should know this, right? They won the World Series. It's getting longer and longer ago, but it's still only 7 years ago. You win a World Series with stars, and they don't have any. He's the closest thing they have to one. And so instead of just letting him go and trying to find somebody who's almost as good, you keep him and you keep trying to add to the other part of the roster. Your whole goal should not be trying to replace Cody Bellinger. It should be keep Cody and then we replace some other bum. So now we've got Cody and this other guy, and hopefully Seiya is actually going to hit now for the rest of his time with the Cubs and whatever. It's just one of those things where if they let him go then they go into next season worse than they finished this season.
Maybe the end of the year numbers will show them, but you can't. Dansby was a very good acquisition. I was afraid maybe he was going to be Jeff Blauser Part 2, but he was very good, and he does a lot of things well. But you can't have him be your best player.
No.
That's not good enough.
No. I was skeptical of it too, because in my big brain, everyone should listen to everything I say. He was clearly, I thought he was the fourth best of the four shortstops. Clearly the rest of the league did too. He got the least amount of money. Still got a lot of money, but he got the least amount.
Right.
And I will admit, I completely undervalued his defense. Like he really is a great defensive shortstop. And I'm sure we talked about this. One of the things I looked at when you looked at the numbers, this is a terrible way to judge a shortstop's arm. But if you looked at Baseball Savant, his miles per hour on his throws was like shockingly low. And you're like, holy crap, he doesn't have a good arm. But then all you have to do is watch him play. And one of the fun things about watching Dansby play is that he somehow has this ability. He knows exactly how hard to throw the ball to beat the runner by a step.
Yes.
If he has to really throw it hard, he does. And if he doesn't have to, he will throw it so slowly, like, oh my God, the guy's going to beat it. And he always beats the guy by a step. He just knows how to do that. But you can also see how he was the Braves they kept everybody. And they didn't keep him. Now, they also didn't keep Freddie Freeman, but they immediately, like even before they lost Freddie, they added Matt Olson. Like they hedged that bet. If the Olson thing hadn't happened, they'd have thrown more money at Freddie. It's not like they gave him away. Because as good as Dansby is, and he's a good player, he was their seventh or eighth best player. And you're right, he came out of the Cubs, and at worst, he's their third best player, probably their second.
Right.
And you have to make moves to push him down the pecking order.
Right.
You have to keep raising the bar. Where Dansby's a good player, he's going to play shortstop for you for 6 more years. That's fine. But you have to put better and better players in that lineup with him, and he has to keep scooting in the opposite direction. And then it's exacerbated this year by the fact that he hurt his heel against the Brewers in a game, went on the injured list, and when he came back, he didn't hit for shit the whole rest of the year. And I'm sure that it's not a coincidence that he came off the injured list, and it probably didn't help that this is a literal stat because I looked it up. Until the last day of the season when he sat out yesterday, from the day he came back from the injured list, which was in July, he played all but 6 innings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, all right, you got a guy with a bum foot. Maybe give him a day off once in a while, because you know what? Your second baseman is a Gold Glove caliber shortstop.
He can go do that.
And you can DH Dansby. You don't even have to take his bat out. I mean, that was the thing we railed about on another podcast was if the Cubs really did get tired, right? Like the players got physically worn down by the end of the year. Their DH is Christopher Morel. He's their super utility player. They could literally have kept the same lineup every day and rested a player every day by just having them DH and Morel play their spot that day. Say can DH and Morel plays right. Whoever's in center, like the great Mike Talkman, can DH that day, and Morel will play center. And they just didn't do it. Like those position players just played every single day, and I don't know if they really got tired or not, but it was not an effective use of. He basically the best athlete on your team hardly ever played in the field. He always DH'd. And if their argument is, well, he's not really any good at any of these positions, it's like, well. He's been in your minor league system for 8 years. Couldn't you have found a spot for him and just taught it to him? They supposedly taught Nick Madrigal how to play third base in like 2 months in the offseason. I got news for you. Chris Morel's a much better athlete than Nick Madrigal. Just whatever those Tom Amansky tapes that you gave Nick, give a set to Christopher Morel and have him watch him this offseason, and maybe that'll fill a spot for you. All right. Well, we began and ended with me ranting about the Cubs, which is good. I was going to have you tell us who's going to win the World Series, but I think I would rather just have you back on later in the playoffs, and then we don't have to blindly guess. We can just talk about it.
And my guess won't be as outlandish because some of the teams have been eliminated, and I won't pick the wrong team for sure.
Right. It's going to be because it'll be the Marlins. because when they make the playoffs, they win the World Series. Actually, they ruined that, didn't they?
They did.
But I guess they get cling to this. In a full season, every time they made the playoffs, they won the World Series.
At least until this point.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Well, enjoy the baseball, and thanks, Dave.
You're welcome, Andy.
Many of us have herpes.